Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to have an opportunity to talk to a person that always gets the heat when things aren't going great. But we'll talk tonight about some of the things that Beacon Hill has done for us. You know, it's scary when you hear, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. Well, this time it's actually come through where we've had a lot of help. Why don't we start with an introduction?
Well, thanks so much, Al, for having me. It is such a pleasure to be back officially as your state senator now after securing the win in November. So I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be representing Milford in the state senate, and really honored to be serving all the wonderful folks here in Milford and the 10 other communities in our wonderful district. So I'm now in my third term, and I currently serve as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources, the Senate Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities, and the Vice Chair of the Senate Committee on the Census. So it's touching on a lot of my sort of areas of both experience and expertise, and policy and funding interests. And the session is underway. We're up and running, and everything is alive with activity and engagement, and it's an exciting time. It's never dull, as I like to say.
Well, it feels good to be able to say welcome, Senator.
Thank you.
Not welcome person who's going to be our senator and who's coming to Milford before she becomes our senator to learn Milford and help us out.
Well, it's great to hear.
Where do we start? Start with children.
Children. Well, I am very humbled to be the only mom of kids under 10 in the entirety of our state senate at the moment, and my kids are in elementary school. And so I spend it's a responsibility that I take very seriously to ensure that the voices of real life families, real life working families who are going through, the stress of trying to pay for daycare, the stress of trying to figure out, after school care, and even getting your kid to the pediatrician, even putting like the sports schedule into your calendar. I did that the other night. It took me 2 hours to get my kids' baseball schedules into the family calendar. And those experiences are real, very real, and they are continually changing and evolving. And so we're doing a lot of work, not only to support parents of families with young children, but also teens and students across the board. So I'm very proud, actually, of the successes that we've already had in this space. In fact, an idea that came straight from feedback from students that we heard through my student-focused, student-only town hall. We had some adults that continually try to come in, and we keep not letting them come in. But we have a student, teen-focused town hall, and we'll be announcing additional dates coming up shortly. But in that very first meeting, we had students say very clearly and frankly very bravely how they really needed different and better mental health support. And so we got to work immediately, and within a matter of weeks, which is frankly an unheard of time frame on Beacon Hill, we had secured $250,000 to launch a pilot program for a youth mental health support text line, right? Because we need to be able to meet kids where they are, and they are on their phones. So we secured the money. We worked with Samaritans, which is a nonprofit that is dedicated to providing mental health supports and services for people everywhere throughout the Commonwealth. And within a matter of months, they had created the text line. It's called Hey Sam, and it has been a smashing success. It is peer-to-peer, so it's trained young people on the other end of the text line. It is totally free. It is completely anonymous, and it is fully confidential. And if you text anytime right now between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., you can find a trained young person on the other end of the text line to talk to you about anything, whatever's stressing you out in the moment. You're having a rough day, you're having a fight with a parent, or a fight with a partner, an intimate partner or friend, or if it's something even more serious than those things, that all the way up to you're feeling really
So you text, "Hey,
suicidal.
Sam"?
You can text "Hey Sam." So we got $250,000 for the pilot, and the pilot was so overwhelmingly successful that the current fiscal year, right, fiscal year 23, we secured a full $1 million to support that program, and that program has just the success rate is phenomenal. In fact, for young people who are texting in, who are suicidal, who are experiencing suicidal ideation, the text line has a 100% success rate in de-escalating that situation and saving lives. This program is saving lives. So part of the work that we're doing right now, actually, my team and I, with our colleagues in the House, is to ensure that we keep that funding to help Hey Sam not only continue, but also to expand, right? Because the hours right now are 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., where it's staffed with another young person, other young people, plural. And we'd like to see that expanded until midnight, because there's a whole slew of texts that are coming in between 9 p.m. and midnight that go unanswered until the next day, or get diverted, to another line. So we know there's need in those time frames, and this additional funding would
What a great
help to support
concept
it.
to have kids talking to kids.
Yeah, right. I don't know what it's like to be a teenager in today's world. As a years ago, I was a teenager. I was one once upon a time, but it's been a while. And frankly, the stresses of the world are very different. We didn't have social media when I was a kid, and I didn't even have a cell phone until I was in college. So it's a really different world right now. And it is actually the number one thing that I hear from young people as Hey Sam's most attractive feature is that it's peer-to-peer.
Now, is Hey Sam for all of Massachusetts?
Yep.
Or?
Yep. You can text from anywhere in Massachusetts. It is specifically designed for people under 24. So young people can text in anytime they want.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that's a big piece of the work that we're doing to support our youth. I also have several pieces of legislation specifically on youth mental health. One that would create much more accessible mental health counselors in schools, and providing those counselors and professionals at a rate of at least one professional for every 250 students, which is nowhere near what we have right now. But it's one of the things I hear consistently about, not only from the students and families, but also from teachers and administrators, that they need more behavioral health staff, trained professionals.
That's substantial money. I mean, I think of Milford High. I mean, we're a small town, but it's 1,400 kids.
It's not that small. Yeah. I mean, look, it's not as big as Boston, but it's a lot bigger. It's one of the bigger communities in my district. And and students need it. Students need that kind of access. And that's the recommended ratio, so 1 to 250. So that's a bill that we have pending. We have another bill to provide substance use recovery housing on college campuses, so that students who are in recovery can still engage in the college life and in college studies in a trauma-informed and supportive way. So, right, and these are ideas that come from partnerships with other legislators in other states, right? That bill about school mental health counselors is actually already law in Colorado. And I spoke with a colleague of mine in Colorado who was the lead sponsor of that legislation. I said, "Hey, talk to me about this bill," and and she did. And I said, "Oh, I wonder if we can do that in Massachusetts." And in partnering with people who have experienced loss, this bill about recovery housing actually came from conversations with a parent who lost a child to an overdose, which is heartbreaking. These parents have amazingly turned that pain into action in a way, frankly, that I can't imagine. But they've done it, and this is a bill that they really believe would have helped their child. And I think is actually going to be really helpful for other students.
And it doesn't go away. I
No,
remember
I don't think so.
when I was at your spot, an almost teen, a child that's an almost teen, and you're so scared.
Yeah.
Have I brought her up right?
Right.
Have I given her enough confidence?
Right.
And then Amy Leone comes on and says, "You can have the greatest kids in the world. They get a knee injury, and they're hooked on Oxy."
Oh gosh.
My heart stops.
Yeah.
And finally, okay, my kids are 35 and 30.
Mm-hmm.
I'm over. And then I look down and I got two grandkids,
Yeah.
7 and 4. And I'm like, oh my God, it's going to start again.
Yeah. My parents tell me that grandparenting is the best thing in the world. But yeah, of course, I think you always
It is the
worry about your
best.
kids. Yeah.
It is the most wonderful thing in the world because you can't do anything wrong. We've
Not to
had-
the grandchildren, at least.
We've had this whole discussion about carbo loading my grandchild. He
Oh.
loves French fries and ice cream.
Oh, really?
go to
I
Dairy
mean, what
Queen.
kid doesn't?
Fill him up, drive him home, which
And then
is a
you
mile
set him
away.
out.
Before the carbohydrate titer builds up, he's already home.
Ah, look at that. That's so wonderful.
My daughter keeps telling me there's bad sides to carbo loading, and I said, I haven't found any.
Yeah, you're not around for when that kicks in.
But
After you drop them off.
it's funny, we laugh about things, but one of the things I know that you fought for was we're losing federal funding for feeding our kids.
And this is a really significant
And
issue.
we joke about French fries and ice cream, but to a lot of kids, this is bread and butter.
For a lot of kids, this is the main source of their intake, of their caloric intake. And so this is in the midst of the peak of the pandemic, the federal government provided money to support universal school meals for all students. And there were a lot of very creative ways put forth to deliver those meals, right? Because kids weren't in school for a long time, right? Or at least not in person in school because we didn't yet have full vaccines, and we were trying to figure out. We were still learning
We're all
about COVID.
scared to death to send them to school.
And the schools were closed for public health reasons, right? I mean, that is the definition of a pandemic. So we were in that spot, and the federal government provided these dollars, and we quickly put those dollars to use and provided universal school meals. That funding actually expired over a year ago. And about a year ago, and we in the state legislature said, we're going to figure out how to pay for this, because this program, ensuring that we are providing universal school meals, breakfast and lunch for every student, every child that walks into that school, is literally feeding our kids. And so we provided that additional funding for, in fact, it's still continuing through this year. And now we're looking ahead to the fiscal 24 budget, which the House is about to take up their budget. Their budget, at least as of the moment of the taping of this interview, their budget is going to be released tomorrow. So it's a very exciting time on Beacon Hill. The Senate will follow in May with our budget and budget debates. We debate the budget in the Senate the week leading into Memorial Day weekend. And I expect to see universal school meals continue in the forthcoming budgets, and I hope we will make it permanent.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah.
Because
Now, it's not the only piece, right? I mean, today, I was having a conversation about not just the availability of food, but making sure that food is nutritious and healthy. And, I'll tell you, my kids one day came home saying, Mom, lunch was terrific. We had Lucky Charms for lunch at school. And I thought, I'm sorry, what? And they said, yeah, we had cereal for lunch. Now I introduced cereal for lunch. Okay, you can have cereal and some milk and maybe a piece of fruit or something. Okay, fine. But Lucky Charms, not sure that particularly fits the bill. So there actually is a bill now pending before the legislature to ensure that not only that breakfast and lunch are available, but that the predominant portions of those meals
is real food.
Is healthy and nutritious food.
Does that take us back to when they tried declaring ketchup as a vegetable?
I had the same thought. So we have lots of pieces moving about similar problems.
It's funny because the one thing that never comes as a doubt, we have a secret weapon, Carla Tuttle from Olivas.
That's true. You do. You're very lucky here in
The
Milford.
minute anybody says food by Carla, okay,
You're set. Yep, you're good.
Nobody's going to question it. I mean, I got lucky when we did the graduation parties. Carla and Olivas catered. Mm-hmm. Nobody went home hungry.
Oh, yeah. No,
it was
you can't.
impossible.
It's delicious. It's really
You
delicious
know, it's
food.
like a few years ago, the freezers went out in the high school. It's 80-some thousand
Oh boy.
dollars of not planned.
Right.
When Carla came in and said, "I need this to keep food going," the whole FinCom just looked and said, "What are you gonna say? No to Carla?"
You
You know,
can't say no. Yeah. Plus, we need to be able to provide for people who need those provisions.
well, it's scary because I never thought we are over 53% of kids who actually qualify for free lunch. I
And
mean,
that's part of the beauty of this plan. The universal school meals plan is that it takes that
stigma.
qualification away, so there's no stigma. All the kids are getting lunch at school, and there's no worry that nobody needs to punch in a code and wonder if you have enough
Walk up
money
with
in
it.
your account, or walk up with something. That stigma has just gone away. And as we were talking a few minutes ago about youth mental health, right? As we're working to combat the youth mental health crisis with things like Hey Sam, we need to do everything we can to help our young people be healthy, both physically and mentally, right? Mentally,
How can a
emotionally.
kid have a good day if they're, it just sounds horrible, if they got an empty belly?
But they can't. They're not going to, and they certainly can't learn that way.
You know,
And this is something that until we put universal school meals in place, we saw students going without, no question. And, and even students who might have qualified based on an income assessment their parents might not have signed them up for whatever reason. And there are lots of different reasons why that paperwork might not have been completed. And so they might literally not have money. Now you don't have to worry about it. You get the meal, and that's it.
and when you really think of how much it's costing, it really isn't that hard to justify.
In the grand scheme. But, a budget,
Budget's a
look,
budget.
a budget is a statement of values, right? Any budget is a statement of values. Even your personal budget is a statement of values, right? What are you valuing in your home, in your family? Where do you spend your money? Are you spending it on a vacation? Are you spending it on a really extravagant party? Are you spending it on dining out? Are you spending it on new clothes? Right? You choose where to spend your money. The same is true at the local level, right? When the town decides how to allocate its funds. And the same is true at the state and federal government levels as well. So when we sit down to debate our budgets, we have to decide collectively, and a majority decides, right? We might vote no on something and it still goes through, but or the opposite, right? You might vote yes on something and you might not have enough support. But that budget is a statement of our values every year, every single year. And we need to decide not only how do we allocate those dollars, but also how many dollars are we going to have.
I decide whether I'm going to go spend $2 on my cup of coffee,
That is true. Yep.
right? I work hard, at least I pretend I do, and I buy myself a cup of coffee. That's a decision. We're talking about families living under 34 grand a year,
Yeah.
whose decision is breakfast or lunch.
Yeah.
It's not, hey, we going out tonight? We're going to the movies? No, it's, do I buy enough for all my kids to have breakfast or lunch? That's why this program just
That's right.
seems like a no-brainer to
Yeah,
me.
that's right. And that's why, investments in rental supports and housing supports and from the state level, that we're doing what we need to do to uplift the people who are but should never have to choose between paying for their prescription medication and paying for food on the table. Or I recently heard actually from a student whose parent had to make, I don't even know how you make this choice, had to choose between paying for her mental health care and paying for food. That was the choice. And that parent should never have to make that. No parent should have to make that
You
choice.
bring up housing. I'm stunned because I see houses in Milford 700, 800,000.
Yeah.
When I grew up, you could have bought Milford for 700,000. They would have thrown in Hopedale or Mendon. Now you sit there and say, how can people afford, even
Well, you can't.
to rent?
You can't. And so this is part of the conversation that is, unfolding on Beacon Hill, and it's part of, at least certainly part of the conversations I'm having, both with my colleagues, with constituents, with experts in housing policy. And I've come to believe, and I'm still learning, there's a lot to learn about housing policy. I've come to appreciate that there is something that we haven't yet really addressed enough, the term of art that I've heard is called the missing middle, right? The folks who, not we need to and are providing support for folks on the low income side. Folks with more financial means, generally speaking, have been able to find stock if the stock is available, right? And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes, we are certainly facing a housing stock shortage. And then there are the folks who are middle income folks who want to be able to buy a home and are just priced out almost everywhere. And that's the missing middle. What do we do from a policy perspective to boost to help the missing middle, right? What are we going to do to incentivize development of housing, right? Homes that are affordable for, working families. And I don't have the answer to that question yet, but I am asking the question. And I think that is, in and of itself, a step in the right direction.
Well, I think it gets exacerbated by the fact that kids are coming out of college drowning.
That's true.
I mean, I don't know about you, but most of the kids I graduated with, when we graduated, we came out with $32.80 in our pocket. But it was my $32.
Yeah, and you weren't facing 6 figures worth of debt.
I didn't have to pay $1,000, $1,500 a month for college loans.
I'm still paying off my college loans. And it's not going to go away. Now, higher education is also a big part of what I think we're going to be doing this session on Beacon Hill and taking some action on it. You heard it from the governor. You've heard it from the Senate president. We're starting to hear comments about it from the Speaker of the House as well, that we want to provide no cost.
Free community college.
Exactly. Community college for people. Now, which people and which places, the devil's always in the details, and we're going to have those debates. But I think it's a huge piece. I also think it's a huge piece to helping our workforce shortage, right? Like teachers. We were talking about schools earlier. I was just talking on an education forum in another town I represent earlier this week. Yesterday. That was just yesterday. And I've certainly heard it from lots and lots of other folks as well. There's a teacher shortage. We don't have enough teachers. We're short-staffed. There's also a big funding problem for our schools right now, which my colleagues and I are working on.
Teachers what they should be paid.
Well, that's part of it.
I know I'm being...
No, that's part of it, but it's also, getting the college degree that you need in order to achieve licensure as an educator in Massachusetts is expensive, right? It's expensive.
We had a hard time. I've been in biotech for a while.
Right.
I could recruit from the left coast. I could recruit from the east coast. Mm-hmm. I stood snowball's chance in the Mojave of pulling somebody from a square state.
Yeah.
Just because of the housing costs.
Right.
My brother-in-law bought a house down in San Antonio, Texas. 4-bedroom, acres, $300,000.
Yeah, and we all laugh because you can't afford a parking space for that here.
Well, his company asked him if he would transfer to New England. Mm-hmm. So he came up and he said, well, I guess I hear New England's more expensive. I'm going to have to go up to like 400 or... And he said,
he had some pretty notable sticker shock when he got here.
And he basically said it's not worth it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the missing middle, right? That's the missing middle. And so we have to figure out how we're going to address that portion of the housing challenge. And the Senate is going to vote in a couple of days on the governor's proposal to create a specific secretariat just for housing, right? A member of the cabinet in Massachusetts who is the housing secretary, only housing, not paired with economic development, which I think is a huge step in the right direction, because we need somebody who is going to be focused people, not just one person, but lots of people who are, policy experts and administrators who are laser focused on housing and making sure that we are addressing this housing crisis in a meaningful way quickly, because we can't wait, right? We know that people are leaving Massachusetts. They're leaving because they literally can't afford to stay. And that is on the
places like
legislature and the government to address.
North Carolina started building up their biotech. All of a sudden you turn around and say, I can get a 20-30% raise just because my housing
Because
costs
their
and
cost
my
of living has
living
gone
goes
down. Right, exactly.
I don't know that. I mean, I'm too old to move. But if I was starting out my life, got
Yeah.
a couple kids under 10,
Yeah.
and I sit there and say, Massachusetts is cool, I love it, but I could give them a heck of a lot more.
I had a good friend, and she and her family, they have 3 kids, and they picked up and moved to Ohio because they could not afford to stay. They just could not afford to stay here. Both parents worked. Both parents had good jobs, professionals, and they just couldn't. They couldn't afford it. They just couldn't afford to stay here.
And then you start losing the parents. Because I always say, you
Right,
want to know where you're going to live? Look for the grandkids.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Indeed.
That has nothing to do with religion, with ethnicity. Every grandparent is
Grandkids. I want to be near the I think it's very real.
So all of a sudden, your friend picks up the grandkids, moves them out to Ohio.
Right.
Grandma and grandpa are sitting here saying,
Yeah.
Ohio doesn't look so bad.
In this particular case, the grandparents were already in Ohio.
Oh.
So.
But
But
now,
your point is well taken,
what can
my friend.
you do for housing?
Well, there are a lot of things that we can do for housing, and I think there are a lot more things that we could and should be doing for housing that we haven't fully baked yet. One of the things is rental assistance, and there are a number of different ways that we can provide rental assistance, but. We were talking about the budget earlier. Unfortunately, the current proposal on the table is actually to cut rental assistance, and that, to me, this is the wrong time to be doing that.
But what does it mean, rental assistance?
So there's a fund that we have, a state fund that provides a certain amount of money in chunks, right? Certain allocations to people who are having trouble making the rent, but that additional amount can help get there. And we've seen in the data that additional amount, that supplement, not only helps the renters, but also helps the owners, right? The landlords, or you don't have to.
So they get paid.
They get paid, and you don't have to find a new renter and maybe run into the same problem. I mean, there's all sorts of wonderful things that come from stability, right? So that money is currently put out at roughly $10,000 per year. Per recipient.
Wow.
And that's it's not a small amount, it's a significant amount. But the proposal is to reduce it to $7,000 over 2 years, right? So it's cutting it basically to less than half. And you can reach more people, but the amount of money is per eligible individual or eligible household is significantly lower. And with the prices of housing going way up, there's still
What's
an
the
overall cut in the
incentive?
total $1.
If I own a house and I'm renting it, and I don't get paid rent, why wouldn't I just sell the house? Why would I keep trying?
You might. We also need to build more, right? Let's be real. We don't have enough housing. We just don't have enough. And so the proposal that the Governor Baker pitched last term, and actually the term before as well, but it actually went all the way across the finish line last session, was to change the zoning vote requirements, right? So instead of needing a 2/3 supermajority vote, you just need a simple majority vote in your town government,
Is this
whatever
like a
the form is.
40B project or?
That's distinct from 40B. But to change you can rezone basically. You can do housing zoning reform to increase housing stock with a simple majority vote. And there are a number of pieces in to incentivize and in some cases require additional housing around transportation, public transportation. So well, Milford's not impacted because Milford's not on the MBTA, but MBTA communities have additional housing requirements. But unfortunately, what we're seeing, and this was one of my concerns at the time, was partly those votes are still not going through. And even if they are, the construction that's coming in is still wildly unaffordable, right? It's luxury units, luxury homes. And that's still not helping the missing middle
Well, I got a
get into
kick out
those
of
units.
Below median price. So the
Right.
area is 700,000, the house is 600. Okay, that's still a $5,000-6,000 a month mortgage.
Right. Yeah.
How does that help
So,
the
well,
blue collar worker?
exactly. So this is the tough nut to crack. And so I'll say here, if anybody's got a good idea and they want to come and chat with me and my staff, by all means, sign up for office hours. We actually have office hours coming up right here in Milford, at the library in a couple weeks. And, you can sign up right on our website, BeccaRauschMA.com. We hold monthly office hours every month, and we alternate between in-person and virtual. So if you want to come and meet face-to-face, the upcoming in-person ones are right here in Milford. The alternating months are virtual, so you can be anywhere and Zoom in with me and my team.
Well, I think the problem is you hear about the percentage of people who abuse it, who don't pay their rent, who can't get evicted and then just walk away, but they could.
I think that's a bit of a...
But you don't hear about the mom who's struggling, who's working
Right.
2 jobs, trying to...
And you don't hear from her because she's
She's
spending,
working.
Yeah, she's working. She's keeping her head above water and she's keeping a roof over her family's head, and she's too busy to be bothering about telling her story far and wide and loudly.
And her story doesn't sell newspapers.
That's right. I also think that there's a lot of I think the few incidents of any kind of misuse or mistake is really overblown in the grand scheme, right? Proportionally, it's just disproportionate coverage, as you.
But that sells
you rightly-
newspapers.
Well,
I mean,
there it is.
that gets print and gets people wound up and excited.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the work. It is part of the work I feel very privileged to continue doing. Right, housing, again, big piece. Education, big piece. Mental health, big piece.
I noticed you're involved in the census.
Yeah.
It's 2023.
Yep.
It's 3 years past the census, 7 years before we think about it again.
Well, 7 years before you will think about it
Right.
again. But the census is a continuing process. It's rolled out from a federal level. It's rolled out every 10 years for you to fill out a form. But how that works and the various tracts and what the questions are and how we make sure we reach everybody. These are ongoing questions that require attention at all times. And particularly in these intervening years, these intermediate years, right? We're not in a census rollout year. We are a couple of years away, but we're actually not that far away from it from a planning perspective and from a perspective of thinking about changes we can make to improve equity in the census process.
How do you get people? I mean, my darling bride was working constantly.
Mm-hmm.
I did my census. She didn't. She got a phone call, I thought, every other day
Yeah.
from a census taker. We got notes on our front door.
Yeah, fill this out.
So you had to give credit to this. Probably
Al,
not.
Did you know for every person that we don't count in the census, we lose roughly $2,400 in federal funding every year for a decade, right? Every person. And your spouse is not one of the folks who is a traditionally undercounted person. I might take that back, but we have these traditionally undercounted populations, right? Seniors are a traditionally undercounted population, actually, and particularly because the most recent federal census was done electronically, and so there was a lot of there were a lot of access issues. So a lot of our councils on aging did some really phenomenal work rolling out census assistance for all of their, all the folks that they support. They became little like census hubs. Not usually part of the Council on Aging or Senior Center job description, but it becomes that way every 10 years. And it was particularly difficult in 2020 because of COVID, right? And several of
Milford loses $24,000 for everybody who doesn't sign up over the decade.
for every person that the census misses, yes, $24,000, because it's $2,400 per person per year for 10 years.
Think of what we could do with that 24.
I'm saying, and you know what other group of people is traditionally undercounted? Young children, because parents are sleep deprived, and people just forget to write down their kid, and that means we also don't have any education funding for that child until from the federal government, at least for a decade. Right? They're going to enter school at some point. Communities of color, hugely undercounted traditionally. Immigrant communities, undercounted. Veterans, undercounted.
Now, the immigrant community, is it because they're scared of ICE or whatever?
There's a fear factor. There's also a language gap and barrier sometimes. There are a number of reasons. But that's also why this equity work in this moment is so important, right? We can and should create significant infrastructure that will help ensure that we reach those traditionally undercounted populations every time we roll out a census, and create some institutional history so that we learn from decennial census to the next. And we can do that, right? We can pass legislation or at least start having the conversation about it so that by the time we get to the 2030 census, we don't miss people.
That was the toughest show we've done, because we did it first in English, the census show, then in Portuguese, then in Spanish.
Yeah.
But it was trying to get the word out
Right.
to people to say, we need you to be counted.
So, but the way that or at least the way that experts and grassroots community leaders, particularly in trusted partners in traditionally undercounted communities, including immigrant communities, the way you get that word out is through those trusted partners, right? And in collaboration with each other, so that it's not some person you've never seen before coming into your community saying, hey, I want you to do this. Why should I trust you, right? It's somebody somebody you trust. Faith leaders, for example, can be wonderful, wonderfully supportive of ensuring that we get a more accurate count. So, that's a big part of that work. And that work actually happens right now, even though you're not thinking about the census, but I'm thinking about the census, but that's part of why we have policymakers.
Now, do you count just the, I guess, politically incorrect term, legal residents, or does everybody
documented
get
residents?
Documented.
Everyone gets counted. Everybody gets counted. Everyone should get counted. Not everyone does get counted.
So even the people who are undocumented, because we still have, let's face it, a kid is a kid.
Yeah.
If you're living in Milford, your child is here, he or she bleeds Milford red, we're going to educate them.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, a lot of families are mixed status families, where you have maybe one adult who has immigration documentation, and another who doesn't. And there's a very real possibility that whole family won't get counted, however many kids there are, right? Because you have a mixed status family. And those are real challenges. And that's why complete count committees and, working with trusted organizations here in Milford and in other places to get the word out that the census is a safe thing to do, and important to help support, all the people in the town, but particularly including your family.
Well, especially if
you
you
know.
get the word out. I mean, when my family moved here,
Hmm.
my father had 4 years of education in Portugal, because that's what you got.
Yep.
He worked like a dog. He would show up to every school event, have no idea why. But they told him, you have to go and support your son.
Hmm.
He put on his jacket, put on his hat, go sit in the auditorium, have no clue what was going on. But if you
Yeah.
asked him, I'm supposed to help my son. I'm here to help my son.
Well, that's amazing.
And
I think parents will do so much for their kids.
and the effect it had is I sat there because I knew he had no clue what was going on around
Right.
him and my
Right.
mom.
Yep.
But they were there
They came to support you.
because somebody told him. So, going to
Mhm.
like St. Mary's Church where we have three, well, now we have more, but we have three major populations, Americans, not American, English speaking, Portuguese and Brazilian
Hmm.
and Spanish.
Hmm. Multiple languages.
We have different masses so that everybody can
Everybody
worship.
can participate. Yeah, everybody can worship. Yeah. So, we have work to do. We have work to do in multiple spaces, right? We were chatting just before we started taping about, healthcare, reproductive healthcare, and it's we shouldn't be. Not only should we not have to choose between, people shouldn't have to choose between their prescriptions and food on the table. We also here in Massachusetts have pretty significant protections for reproductive health and making sure that all people can
Do
access
we?
the full spectrum. We do. We have done a lot of work in the legislature at the state level, to protect access to
Then
reproductive
how
and
does some
gender
guy
affirming
in
health care.
Texas take a machete to our protections?
Yeah, well, because it's all of our medications, prescriptions, are approved for use or not approved for use by the Federal Drug Administration, or the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And whether the FDA appropriately followed its rules and processes in the approval of a particular medication, like mifepristone, is a question of federal law, and not a question of state law. So I have to applaud the governor for stockpiling mifepristone and working with UMass in order to do that, so that people in Massachusetts will continue to have access to medication abortion. And we need to continue to build on our past successes. For example, we need to really significantly and quickly address abortion and birth care deserts. This is a piece of legislation actually that I personally passed last session, along with several colleagues working in collaboration, to get a plan from the Department of Public Health about how we are going to address this issue where we have residents in Massachusetts who have to travel 50 miles or more to find a clinic, a legitimate clinic. We have to fix that problem. And so, the legislature passed.
When you said deserts, I'm thinking square states, like
Yeah,
way out west.
not a desert where it is an arid and hot temperament, but
But in
temperature.
Massachusetts, you're saying we have limitations.
We still do. By a healthcare desert, we mean an area of the state where people have to drive go, whether or not they can drive themselves, very long distances in order to access care. And that is absolutely a problem in a number of places within our state. Milford is lucky. You have two, you have a hospital, you have, and the community health center right here. You have a brand new, fully integrated health setting with behavioral health now also incorporated, also right here in Milford. Milford has a lot of healthcare, which is really fantastic. But Milford is lucky. And,
Beck,
people
I
need
think we get spoiled because we assume that because Ed Kelly and Frank Saab and them have built this medical mecca that this is normal.
Yeah. Yeah, not normal. It's not normal. It's a privilege. And it is one of the many wonderful things about the town of Milford. But not every town in my district has that access, and certainly not towns in other people's districts in other parts of the state. So we have to address that. And we also have to address anti-choice fake clinics. These are places, you've maybe heard the term crisis pregnancy centers. These are places that intentionally use like the same PINK as Planned Parenthood, or locate themselves next door or just down the block from legitimate reproductive clinics, health clinics, to get people in the door. And those people think they're actually accessing a place where you can get the full spectrum of reproductive health care, a place that is legitimately a licensed healthcare clinic, and it's actually not. And the number of fake reproductive clinics, right, these anti-choice crisis pregnancy centers, actually outnumber the legitimate ones by a substantial ratio right here in Massachusetts. So we've got to take steps legislatively to address that. And I've filed a bill that would do that, just that. So we also need to think about where clinicians are going to get their training, right? If you have a medical student who accepted a residency, in Texas, for example, or a host of other states at this stage of the game before the Supreme Court decision came down last year, striking Roe, they may not be able to, in fact, they probably can't actually get the kind of training even to be able to provide the care, period, right? Even if they move to a state like Massachusetts, where that care is legal and safe. So how are we going to train them? I have a different bill on that would provide a limited scope of licensure for medical students who are in residency in other places to be able to come here and get trained on the full spectrum of reproductive health care and gender affirming care so that they can get the training. Because if we don't have professionals, who's going to perform the services? Who's going to perform the care? Right? We have to be able to train people.
Who's going to perform safely?
Exactly. So, we have a lot of pieces of this puzzle that we still need to do, building on the really notable amount of successful legislative work that we've already done in the last couple of years. In part because we saw the overturning of Roe coming, and in part in response to the Dobbs decision when it did come. So, so we've done really significant work. The governor is now, stockpiling the mifepristone in light of a set of cases, the Texas and Washington decisions on medication abortion that inevitably are going to end up in front of the Supreme Court. And then we'll see what happens. And we have even still more to do on that front. And I'm very proud to do that work.
When we start looking at an easier subject to talk about.
Is there one? What is it?
Budget.
Oh, terrific.
How are we looking?
Well, I am a member of the Senate, as you know, and the Senate budget isn't out yet.
So you haven't tipped your hand yet.
So we are not in the budget debate just yet. The governor's budget came out in March. We are in from a revenue perspective, we're in a decent spot. The House budget will come out shortly, within 24 hours of this conversation. Tomorrow, it will be coming out tomorrow. And then the Senate will take up the budget in May. And we have a lot of things that are universal school meals in the budget. Money for Hey Sam is in the budget. Student Opportunity Act, broad spectrum education funding in the budget. Government aid, unrestricted, we call it UGA, unrestricted government, general government aid that supports all of our towns and cities. That's in the budget.
Well, the last couple years, it was heaven sent, because I was one of the people who was nudging our superintendent about always wanting more. He added one kid per year for 40 years.
Yeah.
We graduated 222 out of Milford High in 74, year one. I remember that number because I was one of the 222.
Ah,
And then 40 years later, we're at 260.
yeah.
So we added one child per year.
Yep.
All of a sudden now we're adding 200. And it's not just 200 children.
Yeah.
They're heavy in the English language learners, heavy in the SPED.
And this is why we passed the Student Opportunity Act early in my tenure in the Senate. And kudos to so many of my colleagues who were part and parcel of that work for a decade to get that education funding formula reform to the finish line. I came in just at the last minute to support the bill, strengthen the bill in the ways that I could, and vote yes. There's, generational change to better support our schools. And we are fully funding that. That's part of the budget too. We're in the phase-in process, and that's part of what the fair share money, is going to go to, is to education overall. But we're not at the total full funding yet. We're in year 3 or 4 of the implementation. Right, COVID came in what was supposed to be year 1, so everything got a little bit off track there in the middle. But we're back on track now.
But
and
thank
and
God.
that funding is making a huge difference for districts like Milford.
We understood that Beacon Hill, y'all targeted towns and cities that had high low-income population.
Right.
Milford rang the bell. High ELL, Milford rang the bell.
Yep.
And high SPED, Milford rang the bell.
Yeah, those special education costs, though, are continuing to be a trouble spot, and I'll tell you why. Particularly this year, and I have 11 towns in my district, and I don't know a single school district in my town that is not feeling this pain, and some of them are feeling it very significantly. But in October, the Baker administration approved a 14% increase in the rates for out-of-district special education placements. When you have to, send a student to another school to be able to get the services they need. Now, I'm not saying that the schools that are providing those services probably need those. In fact, I know need those dollars. But historically, that increase in that rate has been less than 2%.
Right.
Year over year. And now we've got this massive 14%, right? 7-fold above any prior increase to my knowledge. And districts have to absorb that cost all right now, all at once. And it is crippling. It is just crippling. And so that is I am confident that is going to be part of our budget debates. How are we going to ensure that we are providing enough money to support districts, the sending districts, right, like Milford, to cover that additional cost of the out-of-district placement.
A lot of people don't understand that you got $100 of total money for the school. Mm-hmm. Right off the top comes the SPED, because it's mandated.
Right. Because it's mandated, that's right. So I have a district, not Milford, but I have another district in my Senate district, a school district that's looking at a 10% workforce reduction because of that 14% increase. That is unacceptable.
Our school budget's going to go up for the second year between 9 and 12%.
Yes, it's significant. It is huge.
I mean,
it's a huge
lucky
increase.
in Milford that we've gotten lucky and we've put a few pennies away and we can weather it. But
right.
That's a huge change
And
in the budget.
some towns can't weather it. And frankly, you shouldn't have to weather it all on your own because that increase came from the state. And so we need to figure out how to fully, in my opinion, backfill that. But that's also part of this question, right, about budget and state revenue. And it's part of the conversation that sometimes people don't like to have. But we're not the federal government. We can't operate at a deficit. I can't create money out of thin air. And we in the state, the same way that Milford as a town has to do, we have to balance that budget every single year. So when we have a whole pie, right? We have one pie, and the size of that pie is whatever revenues come in, right? Revenues meaning tax dollars, largely. And so if we provide some kind of tax cut, especially if that tax cut is going to support the 1%, right, the super wealthy people, that shrinks the pie for everybody, right? potentially to a
Well,
significant
we're
degree.
seeing even in Milford, people started to use profanity. They use those words called 2.5 override and debt exclusion. We've always outlawed profanity at the FinCom.
Well, Prop 2.5 overrides are really difficult, and frankly, at least with regard to this 14% increase for special education costs, in my opinion, you shouldn't have to do it. The state should have to figure out how to fund that.
Well, we haven't done one yet.
Right.
This will be the 15th year that we've had a surplus. So far, so good.
So far.
But we're lucky because it's all about the department heads.
Yeah.
We've got fantastic. I mean, we start out with the school committee where the FinCom, we're broke, we're destitute. And the school committee comes in and says, we need $9 billion increase.
Oof.
And then we sit there, okay, got it out of
What are
our
we gonna
systems.
do?
What can we do?
Right. What are we going to do?
You know, and I always remember years ago, decades ago, when we had a cut in state aid.
Mhm.
In towns around us, their school unions were deferring raises,
Right.
which made no sense to me. Because if I can't afford to pay it now, how am I going to pay double the end? Our
Well, fiscal situations change.
Well, that's what they kept saying, but I want to bet on. I like to bet on yesterday's lottery. But
Anyway.
our union came to us and said, we will forego our raise
Right.
if you take that money and keep it in the school system to keep
Yeah.
our teachers.
Yeah.
How do you say no?
They took one for the team, right? The people who would
Yeah.
have gotten the raise wanted to make
And
sure
then
their
2
colleagues
years
didn't get
later,
fired.
we made it up, so it all worked out.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the partnership, right, between local government and teachers and other workforces, local workforces, and also local government and me and Representative Murray and and our partners in the federal delegation as well. And we all work together as a team to try to do the best we can with the resources available to us for as many people as we can help.
Well, we thank you for everything you're doing. Keep it coming.
Thank you very much. We will keep doing that, and we'll continue, of course, to keep everybody posted. And we hope people, certainly hope people reach out and, and stay tuned for some exciting developments. We're now able to get back to doing in-person town halls, and
That'd be
we have
great.
these office hours and other sorts of things. So really, so excited to be representing Milford, and and really eager and looking forward to continuing this wonderful collaboration.
And to our 6 loyal viewers, thank you for joining us. And as always, may tomorrow be a better night than tonight. May God bless, and we appreciate you tuning in. Good night, all.
Far too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.